Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this afternoon. We'll make a start because there is a fair bit of content to get through and only 30 minutes to do it in. This is part two of three, but don't worry if you miss the first session. There's nothing that you need to have heard before to get value from today. You are able to view the original session on demand as well. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later. As I said, part two of three, really talking around MXDR or managed SOC services and just giving some advice on how you should approach essentially looking in the market for these kind of things. So without further ado, I will move us forward. If there is any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat and I'll either get back to them at the end of the session or we'll pick up with you over email later on today. In terms of the agenda, so four major items really. I won't run through those in any great depth right now, but essentially I'm going to take you through some of the things you need to consider when you're out there looking for a stock. So read the numbers. We always need to consider what the board or the exec level will think about our investment into any security tool or service. And this slide is just to talk about some of the things you might want to consider. Bit of an intro to the session, really. So in terms of what the board will care about, I mean, ultimately, and probably what I would hope would be the priority would be, is the service or the tooling that we've acquired actually protecting us? How effective is it? How can we validate that effectiveness? That's something we'll touch on in more detail later. But really, that should be the main goal of any security service. Is it, there to protect you? Now, second to that often comes the price, unfortunately. So you need to be able to validate, are you spending wisely? So is the level of service you're receiving worth the cost? Is there a way you can estimate your total cost of ownership or TCO? And is the pricing of the service transparent and predictable? Again, all of these points are high level for the minute, and we'll talk about the details of these as we progress in the session. The third one along then, are we improving? So yes, you might buy a great service today, and it may be looking very positive in the short term, but you need to ensure that over the years, over the months, that the service continues to improve. So is the service provider doing things to innovate and enhance their service? If they are they charging you additional fees for that luxury, or is it something that they're giving you as value add as their service matures and evolves alongside your organization? Again, something the board are going to want some kind of evidence for. And in the fourth major area, are we compliant? So you may be in a regulated industry. Even if you're not, you may have certain standards that you want to conform to. Does the service bring you closer to those? Something that also gets forgotten about is insurance, cyber insurance. Does the service bring you closer to being fully compliant with your insurance provider's criteria? That in itself is a huge topic that we'll do a future session on. There is a lot of pitfalls with cyber insurance, but something that the board will want to consider when looking at an MXDR offering. Okay. With that sort of preamble and intro out the way, I want to slowly get deeper into the topic. And I want to start us off by just thinking about some of the high-level metrics that we should be considering. So what I've come up with is just a short list of ideas, right? This is a short list, it's not a definitive list. But some of the things that you want to be able to measure or understand the metrics behind, number one would be the percentage of your state that is monitored and protected. So if this is anything less than 100%, we've got a problem, because if the attackers are able to compromise your organization and focus on that less than 100% areas, those 1 or 2% that may be outliers, then the whole service is kind of nullified, because the provider will have no way to detect the threat and contain the threat. So we need to make sure that it is 100% coverage across everything we have in our business. That's absolutely key. Next, you want to be able to measure the SLA compliance. Now, my recommendation would be this should be contractually obligated by the service provider. So there should be some kind of clause in the contract that explains what their SLAs are and what happens if they miss the SLAs. Usually, or you would hope to expect some kind of penalty that you could redeem against the service. Next along would be KPI compliance. Slightly different than SLA. It's very unlikely you will see any KPIs contractually agreed. Often these are softer targets, but they're still very important. So you should be considering things like mean time to detect, respond, and contain. And these are three of several acronyms that are all relatively similar. The idea is that the lower the numbers, the better. The provider should give you some insight into what their mean time to detect, respond, and contain are. If they're resistant to that idea, that's definitely a red flag. It could indicate their service is not fully mature. I would say the most mature services will actually give you some kind of real-time dashboard view into these metrics, or at least in the monthly service reviews, which is something I'll come on to shortly. They should be providing you transparency into these kind of KPIs. Those obviously just highlight the overall performance of the SOC itself. Next, and this is particularly relevant in terms of the cyber insurance conversation we had. So number four, what is the strength and the level of proactivity behind any security controls? Now, um, if you think of traditional MDR services, they won't go to this extent. But if you consider an MXDR service, where there's that extended service wrapper that is not only managing your security operations, but is also proactively helping you configure and harden your estate, you would expect that level of service provider to achieve number four. So they should be making recommendations. They should be configuring your tooling to make sure that you at least have the bare minimums in place. So things like MFA, making sure your patching policy is good, making sure you're aligned to zero trust principles, and so on. Next along, GRC and similar topics such as data sovereignty. So there should be a way for you to validate where your data is. Is the provider taking your data or your telemetry and ingesting that outside of your organization? Is it leaving your network and therefore leaving your control? If it is, you may have questions and want some reassurance around that. The best kind of recommendation I can make here is that choose a service provider that is able to protect you without extracting data out of your environment. Because the moment it leaves your environment, you lose control of it. You also lose visibility of it as well. So that's an important part for number five there. And then number six, you would want some kind of evidence. So you need to be able to see the detections, the quality of those detections, what's the false positive rate. You need to be able to see the investigation details. So does the provider give you full insight into the ticket lifecycle? So are you able to see all of the steps that analysts have taken to resolve the incident? If you don't have visibility of that, how can you evidence or measure the quality of the service? Well, the answer is you're not really able to. And certainly in terms of response, when the provider is containing or responding to threats, again, what is the evidence for that? What are the practices and procedures they use to protect you? How can you actually see that for yourself? Like I said, this is a short list. We're going to go much deeper than all of these as we get through today's content. So in terms of KPIs, these are very important. Like I said, these are often softer. They're not always contractually agreed like an SLA is, but they're very, very important. So the three major ones, I'll bring them up on screen, are mean time to detect, which is the time from the threat first kind of beginning to the detection actually happening. You want this to be as short as possible because this is the time in which, well, you as it it does what it says on the tin really, you detect the threat. Of course, the quicker you detect it, the quicker you're aware of it, and then you can take corrective action. In the middle then is mean time to respond. So this is the time from confirming the threat is a real and genuine threat to then completing the first response action. That first response action can be a number of things. Quite often, it's going to be a response from the provider to yourselves as the recipient of the service that explains what's been detected, what the service provider is doing about it, and what the next actions are. And usually that would be for the service provider to perform those actions. They should really be notifying you of this. So often wrapped up in mean time to respond is also a triage and maybe a lightweight investigation as well. If you move over to the right, mean time to contain, simply put, this is the time to stop the attack. So we've detected the threat, we've initially understood and responded to the threat. How do we then actually contain it? So if we use ransomware as an example, we'd need to quarantine every device that we believe has been infected by that ransomware. That's going to take some time, and roughly you're looking at a less than 30-minute window of time here. Notice these numerical values are all for P1 level incidents. You can expect that when you have a P2 and certainly a P3 or P4, these times are going to grow. And obviously, you want these numbers to be as low as possible for the highest priority items, P1 obviously being the most important. Beyond this, you want to consider things like false positive rate. So a good rule of thumb would be less than 5% of all detected alerts to be false positive. I would say most providers can achieve this, but the best out there can get this as low as 1 or 2%. So you may want to consider defining a more strict target in this case, depending on, how you feel that service provider may perform. And then next, in general, I touched on this earlier, but you want to be able to evidence the quality and the depth of the investigations. So do you have the full incident life cycle available to you? Can you see all of the actions the SOC team has taken? Um, is this available on demand for you? Can you access it yourself through some kind of dashboard? Or do you have to formally request this information? It's important because some of you will be in audited industries, and you may need to actually provide some of this evidence to your auditors. That also could obviously be an internal audit as well as an external one. Okay, so I'm going to spend a bit of time focused on the cost element. So how do you go about controlling the cost when it comes to a SOC service? Now, I'm going to outline this first by beginning describing what the actual costs are and the different categories of costs that you may run into. So the first area is the log ingestion and retention. Now, with every provider, there will be a price tag here. Some providers obscure this in their monthly service charges. Others are quite transparent. In the case of certain technology vendors, such as Microsoft Sentinel, it will be you yourselves who directly pay the bill for log ingestion and retention. So there's a number of ways this can work, but there is a price tag associated with this. Like I said, whether it's obscured or not is a different question. So you need to understand what kind of gigabyte volume per day is being pulled into the seam. That's number one. You also need to understand if there's some kind of data lake technology available, what is the ingestion volume into that location? The distinction between point one and two is really hot and cold storage. Of course, cold storage being much cheaper to ingest and retain data within. And then point number three is what is the retention period? So there's plenty of SIEM tools out there that will offer a free retention period. 90 days is quite common, but some do offer longer than that. And you need to consider, as an organization, how long do you need to retain the data? Now, there is no UK regulation around retention of data in a SOC, so you can choose as long or as little as you like. I've seen organizations in the healthcare industry who choose to retain it for 12 years. That's their prerogative. They don't have to do that, but many of them feel like they need to or they simply want to. Many organizations are happy with a 90-day retention. So that is very much personal and just something to consider in the grander scale of cost. Obviously, the longer you retain data for, the more expensive it will be. In terms of the actual managed service, then there's broadly three pricing options available you will see out there. Per user per month is the one that is most suitable for the majority of organizations. This is where if you had, say, for 1,000 users, there would be a price tag per user. Let's make up a number and say £10 per user per month. You make that sum and you can figure out quite easily what your monthly and annual cost would be. It makes it very predictable. And it's generally quite a fair model for most organizations. You do sometimes see a per device per month pricing model. For a typical organization that is a mostly IT-based business, I would say this is not optimal for you. Where per device per month is optimal is for organizations who are very heavy in the OT space, for example. Some organizations will have lots of devices, more devices than humans in the business. In this case, it may actually scale better for you. Now, of course, if the price tag is if you've got twice the number of devices, then the price tag may increase by twofold, but it will allow you to maintain a predictable and transparent pricing model. So you as the, purchaser of the service can maybe play that to your advantage, deciding between per user or per device. In terms of the third option, events per second or EPS, this is less and less common. This is a kind of a holdover from the olden days of SOC. It's mostly moved away from this. I would say it's very rare that this is a good choice. The only instances I've seen where this makes sense is for very, very large organizations where they're ingesting terabytes of data every single day. Often they can get the best price through an events per second or gigabytes per day model. Smaller businesses, I would say, and anyone in a SMC, SME, and business or even mid-enterprise, this is probably not going to be cost efficient for you. So just keep that in mind. It's always an option, but perhaps avoid it. In terms of add-on services, so beyond the SOC itself, what else would you require? Do you need some kind of incident response retainer, dark web monitoring, some kind of crisis simulation exercises? There's also, there's always various add-ons you can consider. You just need to factor those into what your wish list is. I won't run through all of the items on the additional service fees here. I'll cover those on the next slide. But the essence here is make sure that the price you're getting from the provider is their best on final price. It's an inclusive price with everything factored in, rather than something that looks cheap on the outset, but actually has a lot of add-on fees at a later point. So what are the levers then that you can pull to reduce or optimize these costs? In terms of log ingestion, you should be working with your service provider to ingest high value security logs, move away from an ingest everything mindset. You should make sure the provider is efficiently ingesting logs, that they're using transformations or summarizations to optimize data as it flows into the SOC, and also make sure that they optimize this over time. It shouldn't just be a one-time exercise. It should be a continuous part of the service they provide to you. In terms of the managed service, I've largely talked about the benefits of each model. I'll let you read through those bullet points while I discuss the rest. Certainly, in terms of add-ons, it's very much down to your organization's requirements there. I won't give you specific advice because I don't know your specific requirements at this time. In terms of those service fees on the right-hand side, again, make sure you get an all-inclusive pricing. Often providers will provide a cheap upfront price, but then when you ask them, okay, I need a custom rule creating, or can you produce a dashboard for me? They send you an invoice. You want to understand the full cost upfront before you sign the contract. So make sure you ask for all-inclusive pricing. Okay. So let's get to the meat of today's session. So how do you go about comparing MSSPs? How do you score an MXDR provider? So I'm going to suggest, and this is only a suggestion, but if you are producing an RFP or simply comparing providers, these are some of the areas that I would recommend you focus on. I've given percentages, but of course you may come up with your own ideas here. We're going to run through the specific details of each of these as we go on. But in essence, most of the weighting goes on to the actual technical efficacy of the service. Ultimately, it is a technology-led service. You want to make sure that they are able to detect and respond to threats properly. That's what you're paying for. So 55% of the weighting goes there. You then want to make sure that they have operational excellence so they can work with your existing technology stack. They can optimize things around that, and they offer a very transparent service. And then 20% goes to trust and governance. So they should be providing you with a customer success manager of some description. That person should be your champion within the provider. They should be going to bat for you and really should be there to make sure you receive the best possible service. So in that 20%, there is lots of individual items, which we'll come to shortly. So in terms of those critical capabilities, that 55%, we can break those down into detection quality. I've given some examples of what would factor into detection quality. You can then break it also down into response capability, and then you can break it down further into coverage. And I'm not going to go through every bullet point on screen, but in essence, you want to make sure that the detection quality is good. So what kind of data is the provider using? Yes, they're ingesting data from your environment, but are they enriching that with any third-party data, any threat intelligence sources? Are the rules and customizations they've developed actually aligned to things like MITRE ATT&CK? Do they have a proactive threat hunting capability? So we want to make sure that their service is proactive, not just reactive. And that's where threat hunting can play a big role. In terms of response, you need to understand the speed of response. So I gave you an indicator earlier. You're looking for perhaps between 5, 10, 15 minutes for a response time. Anything larger than that for a P1 would be a problem. So can we keep that number low? How does the service provider achieve a quick response time? You also obviously want to make sure that it is a 24 by 7 by 365 service. It's really not sufficient to have a working hours only service. I would say that it's almost pointless, close to being pointless. And the reason for that is the attackers do not attack when it's convenient for you. They attack at the least convenient times, which is going to be over the Christmas holidays. It's going to be on the weekend. It's going to be at 2 a.m. in the morning. If the service you've purchased or looking to purchase only protects you 9 to 5, well, it's not going to do a good job in those instances. And then on the coverage side, I mean, effectively, in short, you want that 100% coverage. So can the provider support your entire technology estate? Can they ingest data and telemetry from all sources? If they can't, then again, there's a big gap in the service and you may want to look elsewhere. So if we move on from the critical capabilities and we consider the operational excellence side of things, can they integrate with your existing tools? Yes or no? That's going to be critical. Are they willing to produce customizations to integrate with your existing tool set? Perhaps you have a bespoke application or something unique in-house that isn't out there available on the market. So it may be the first time the service provider ever sees this bespoke technology. Do they have the technical capability or are they willing to integrate with that tool? That's going to be key. Okay. If you've got any kind of bespoke system, you need to understand how the service provider will work with that and whether they'll charge you any extra money for that connection. You should also factor in if they're using AI and then how they are using AI. So AI augmentation is one thing, but if the AI is replacing the human analyst, I would personally question that. As it stands today, there is no AI software that can replace a human. The human is or should be the decision maker when it comes to security operations. AI can speed up their task. It can make the human more efficient in terms of summarizing investigation information, doing some heavy computational work, but the human should be the decision maker. So you need to understand where the service provider draws that line. In terms of transparency, then, so I've mentioned evidence a few times today. Do you get insights into the incidents that have been detected and how they've been responded to? Do you get clear reporting metrics delivered every month via a service review that shows you mean time to respond, detect, contain, acknowledge, various other metrics? Do they show you the false positive ratio? Any kind of insights like this, they should be presented to you because what you want to have is a provider who is proud of how great their service is and they're fully transparent and willing to share these metrics with you. What you also want is a provider who will take accountability if they miss their metric for a month or if they miss it for, a particular incident. You want them to be still providing transparency and ultimately being honest about it. If they're not showing you evidence of how good their service is, how do you know that they're not, to be frank, making things up or, skewing the data some way? So transparency is really critical. Trust in cyber is paramount. Speaking of trust, so in terms of data, we all know it's very important. How is your data being stored? Is it stored within your network boundary or is it exfiltrated from there and stored elsewhere? Really, you want to make sure you've got control of your own telemetry. You also need to know, is the provider certified? Okay, do they have the relevant CREST certifications, for example? You want to understand how they handle your data. So do they have any way to do data masking, to anonymize data so that even their own analysts cannot see things like usernames, IP addresses? Those things exist. Technically speaking, they're available. Does the service provider have the ability to do those things for you? What we also have is incident management. So what is the quality? Again, do you see the end-to-end incident life cycle? Is that made transparent to you? If an incident does happen, a real one, and we need, all hands on deck, do they operate a war room or something similar to bring your stakeholders into the conversation to enable you then as a team to work together? Do they offer any kind of forensic support or malware analysis? These are the things you should be considering too. Okay, is the provider themselves financially stable? So it's quite common in RFPs for organizations to request financial statements from the last number of years. It makes sense, right? You want to understand, is the business you're about to spend a lot of money with financially stable? How long have they been operating for? Have they ever had any serious issues or outages? Have any of their existing customers ever been compromised? And what happened off the back of that? And they provide you with case studies or references for happy customers. It's going to be important. Culture and communication. So they don't have to be in the same country as you, but if you speak a common language and you're able to communicate clearly with each other, that is obviously going to be important. So generally speaking, how well do you get on with them is actually quite an important factor. So you should be considering that relationship element as well. And then finally, exit strategy. So yeah, you of course, if you're going to invest in a SOC service and you're going to spend a lot of money, you don't necessarily want to be thinking about leaving that service. But if you do have to, what's the process for it? Is that described? What happens to your data? Are there any punitive restrictions in the contract? These are things that you should consider. Okay, so due diligence. Now, I've mentioned many of the things that are on screen. I'll just bring up the full list here. In essence, you need to be doing your due diligence. So beyond the kind of scoring that I just took us through, are you going to meet any of the analysts? Are you going to meet them face to face? Are you going to meet them on a call? Can you visit the provider's office and meet some of their team in person? Can you shake the hand of the CEO or the CTO or someone in a senior role? How do they handle your data? Again, very important. Are they well certified? Are they compliant? Can they provide you evidence of these things? What about the supply chain? So do they have any weaknesses in their supply chain? Are they heavily reliant on another vendor or a partner that actually would bring additional risk to you? Or are they a company that really stands on their own 2 feet? So again, these are all elements that you should be questioning. Okay, so with that said, we've reached the end of our session and I'm pretty much out of time. So I want to highlight again that we are providing an MXDR buyer's guide. And so if you've registered for this session, which of course you have, you'll receive this via email. You'll also receive the on-demand session recording as well. We have part 3 of this series next Thursday at 2 p.m. UK time. And if you missed part 1, or maybe you tuned in late to today's session, part 2, you're always able to watch those on demand, either via the link that you'll receive on email or via our website. So just like to wrap up and say thank you, appreciate the attendance, and hopefully speak to some of you soon.